Okay, this is Professor Chris Fleming. This is take 3 of what is a supply chain. So without further ado, let's get started. Well, supply chain is one of those terms that a lot of people will talk about and use, but they don't actually know exactly what it is. And so this is one of those times where I think it helps put a little bit of clarity into the situation. If you take a moment, if you're watching with somebody else, try to figure out what a supply chain is, and then look it up. Or if you're with somebody, talk to them and ask, hey, what is a supply chain? Have you heard it before? Well, where's that from? Well, supply chain is a network of organizations in three things: converting raw materials and information into products and services. So there's a form of transformation that happens. Second, consuming the products and services. So when you buy a product, typically you'll consume it, either transform the raw materials into a finished good, or you'll be the end user and consume that product. And then three, dispose of the products and services. So what happens to the trash? What happens to the garbage that you don't need that came with a product or service? What do you do? And typically, a supply chain is a close working relationship between organizations to make stuff happen. I'll say this again later. Supply chains are about people. Operations is about processes, right? It takes the people out of the equation. It's a routine. It's how do I do something? But supply chains include the people, the organizations, the people who are involved in the groups. So let's take an example. This is you, and you have a product that you want to sell, whatever that product is, right? And there's your people, customers that want to buy your product, and this makes you happy, right? And the problem is that you start your own company, which sounds good. You have an LLC, limited liability company that starts off, and you're starting to grow and get bigger, but then you have to buy your raw materials from your suppliers, who in turn buy their raw materials from a supplier to make a product for you to sell, who in turn work with a supplier that gets the minerals or the oil or whatever it is, the water from the soil, from the ground, from the ocean, etc., natural resources. And then this is just one supplier for your product. Imagine you have multiple suppliers. And on top of that, that's one direction, looking at your supply base. Now let's go the other way. So you are here, you can sell it to the retailer and sell the product to the retailer can sell it, say Meijer or Walmart. In turn, you could sell it to the distribution center for that retailer, so the Meijer distribution center in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who in turn will sell it to multiple Meijer stores for you, or you can sell it directly. So the customers can go to the distribution center, like a Costco or something, or they can go to the retailer, or they can go online and get the product for you. So long story short, supply chains are just really confusing. A small supply chain has about 40 companies involved. Excuse me. Each company having a number of people. So before we get further, let's differentiate between products and services. Products are things that you wear, eat, sit on, use, read, knock around in a sports field, courtesy of a supply chain. They're tangible products. They don't have really a shelf life. They kind of last for a long time. Services are intangible. So every book you borrow from the library, medical treatment you receive, lecture at the university, every service you receive comes to you courtesy of a supply chain. So all these things are theirs, and look at the difference between goods and services here. So goods are tangible, services are intangible. Goods can be inventoried, services can't be inventoried. I can't store it for later. Right? Little customer contact, extensive customer contact. Long lead time, which is a waiting time from when you place an order for a product and then when you get it, versus a service is a short lead time. If you're going to get a haircut, you're there waiting and you wait maybe 5 minutes before they call you in. Capital intensive, so you need equipment to manufacture the products. Labor intensive is for the services. Quality is easily assured and measured, but quality is hard to assess for services, and here's why. You kind of know when you get bad quality, but is it because of a person, or is it because of the service, or is it because of the atmosphere? Is the restaurant a problem? A restaurant is a good and a service. Was it a problem because of the food? It's good. Was it a problem because of the service? Could be the waiter, the waitress, could be the bus person, could be the manager, could be the host or hostess, could be the restrooms, how clean they are, which is more of a tangible, or it could be the near accident you had in the parking lot. It's part of the whole size of the restaurant parking lot. So what caused it to be a bad experience? There are lots of different variables. Material is transformed for a good, but information or the customer is transformed for a service. If you have surgery, the customer is the one who's transformed, is made better. So inside the company, a supply chain has three different departments. Purchasing, where you get the raw materials from. Production, or operations, where the processes for transforming something, a raw material to a finished good, and distribution. Once you have a finished good, how do you get it out to your customers? Sometimes distribution is also used for getting the raw materials from the buyers, from the suppliers to you. So purchasing or procurement is the buying part of getting raw materials. Production does the operations, they transform. Distribution does the logistics. And then you have suppliers and customers on either side. Every step of the process in the supply chain is a value-added activity. You need to plan, source, make, and deliver products and services that meet the customer needs. So every step of the process is a value-added part. If it's not value-added, according to lean manufacturing, you're not going to keep it. It doesn't add value. Why do you have it? It's just wasting your resources and your time and labor. So we have to talk about efficient versus effective supply chains. Efficient supply chains are those that are really cut back on the waste. They try to make themselves as streamlined as possible. They try to cut back the costs. Possibly they cut back the costs to pass that cost savings on to the customer. Walmart's a good example. Amazon's pretty good at it. Amazon buys in bulk and delivers in bulk so they can reduce their costs. Effective supply chains give the customer exactly what they need. So effective supply chains are those companies that really go out of their way to make the customer feel special. So that's a Four Seasons or a Bon Mar or something like that. Now the hard thing is, think of a company that's both efficient and effective. Who's really good at that? And the only one that comes to mind is Amazon, maybe Apple, but it's really challenging to come up with a company that is both efficient and effective. Chick-fil-A is very effective. Are they efficient? Pretty much. I mean, if you're buying food from the drive-through window, they're pretty efficient. They can go through traffic pretty quickly. The only problem with Chick-fil-A is it is a little pricey, so the savings usually isn't passed on to the customer, but it's there. So it's just hard. Where operations management is the management processes used to design, supply, produce, and deliver valuable goods and services to customers. It is the processes. It is not the people. It's not the companies. It's just the processes. You have a routine when you wake up in the morning. You do one step and then step two and then step three. When do you make coffee? When do you take a shower? When do you get dressed, etc.? When do you brush your teeth? Everybody has a different routine, a different processes and how to go about doing that. That's operations. Right? Really, when we're transforming something, that really is true operations. But operations is more just a series of processes to get at a desired goal. So design, supply, produce, and deliver goods and services. Now the challenge is that we're trying to lower costs. That is the big goal in the supply chain. Profit equals revenue minus costs or minus expenses. There are two ways to increase profit. You either increase your revenue by increasing your marketing and sales so you can have more people more customers buy your product. Or you can have supply chains where you're reducing your costs. When you reduce your costs, your profits go up. So that's really the big goal of supply chains. There are others, but the biggest one really is cost savings and cost reduction. Improving quality, the higher the quality, the more likely people are going to buy your product. Enhancing product desirability to meet the customer's needs. Aligning OM or operations management with the company's competitive strategy. So how are you going to compete in the next year? What's your core competency, et cetera? And then evolving with the needs of the customers, competition, and technology, those external forces you've talked about in marketing. What's our social, technological, environmental, competitive, and regulatory. So what is the supply chain? A supply chain, again, is a global network of organizations and activities involved in designing, transforming, consuming, and disposing of goods and services. It's the people. It's the companies. It's the processes, but it's tied with the people. If a company doesn't get back to you fast enough, if a supplier doesn't get back to you fast enough, that's a challenge. A supply chain also is dependent upon the final customer desire. So if the final customer wants to be involved and wants a product now or 2 days or less, such as Amazon, you need to deliver it that fast. And not just the final retailer, but even the producer of the good or service that person wants. So all the way up down the supply chain, that is part of the supply chain. So the definition of it, you're looking at people as well as the process. So here's a diagram of a very simple supply chain. Remember, there's a lot of different companies, but we'll start with you in the middle. It's the firm. You have a supplier next to you that you talk with often, you buy your raw materials from. Then they have a supplier that they buy their raw materials from. They have a supplier they buy their raw materials from. Now, as the firm, you also have a distribution center you sell to, and the distribution center will sell it to the customer. So we're going to take the retailer out right now. If you're looking at the customer and the product going in that direction, that's called downstream. Similarly, if you're going to the supplier, that's called upstream. So if you're looking at suppliers, you're looking upstream. You're looking at customers, you're going downstream. What's also in here is that we call the suppliers tiers, and we call the customers echelons. In other words, if you're standing at the firm, you are ground zero, if you will. So that's you as a company. Your distribution center you sell to is an echelon one because they are one company away from you. The final customer in green would be echelon two because the customer is two companies or two people away from you. You as a firm, your supplier that you talk with all the time and buy raw materials from is a tier one company. Their supplier is a tier two to you because you don't normally interact with them. And their company, their supplier, is a tier three from you, and you rarely talk to them. You just kind of know them by name. That's an entire supply chain. And again, why is that important? Because the further away a company is from you in this chart, then the less likely you are to talk to them. So if changes are made and you're not aware of them, it can impact your product. It can impact the quality. It could impact the health and safety of it. It could impact the desirability of the product, all of those things. So the customer may not want to buy from you anymore. Or more importantly, the distribution center or the retailer won't want to buy from you anymore. So tiers are upstream and echelons are downstream, and you start counting 1, 2, 3, etc. as you start getting further and further and further away from your company. So if I start at the first supplier in dark blue or purplish color in this chart here, then the final customer is at echelon 5 from them. So the first supplier would be at echelon 1, the second supplier echelon 2, the firm would be echelon 3, distribution center, the DC would be in echelon 4, and the customer would be in echelon 5. So you're depending again how far the company is where you're standing is how we can determine it. So supply chain through an operations management lens. Operations management sees a supply chain as a series of processes. So thinking in a systems perspective, it's a process thinking. Viewing parts of a supply chain as a series of interlocking processes. Here's an example. You have a routine when you wake up in the morning. One of those things is make coffee. How do you make coffee? You get a K-cup out, you put it into the Keurig, you press the button, you have water in it, hopefully. If there's no water, you got to put a certain amount of water in. Do you put in tap water? Do you put in bottled water? Do you put in filtered water? Do you need K-cups? If you don't have K-cups, do you go to somewhere else to get the K-cups, such as another box that's in a different room, or maybe under your bed, or whatever it is, right? So there's a separate process on how to make coffee, but making coffee is part of the getting up and going to class routine that you may have. So process thinking is looking at a series of processes. Here's another example. If you're on your way to class, assuming you have to drive to campus, if you're a commuter, there's a whole process on how to check your car or how to start your car in the morning, especially if it's cold. So starting the car and driving the car is a whole routine and a process, but driving to campus is a step in your getting to class process. So the processes are interlocking. The process is a series of activities that transforms valuable inputs into outputs. Excuse me. So for example, if I'm going to have a cheeseburger, my output is a cheeseburger. My input are the raw materials and the ingredients. And for the sake of ease, we'll say the grill is an input, although technically it's a resource. We'll talk about that later. And it gets transformed into a cheeseburger, which you will appreciate. If it's a service, not a good, if you're injured and you need to go to the hospital, you are the input. You're being rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. The surgeon will work on you, which is the transformation. And then the output is a healthy you. So in a service, again, it's the information or it's the customer that's being transformed. In a good, it's stuff, physical goods that are being transformed, raw materials. Other types of processes, we have design processes, which are developing new goods and services. Strategic planning processes determine how the firm should compete. Production processes are planning and executing supply, manufacture, and delivery of goods and services to customers. Evaluation processes, how well did we do? Measure and report how well they're meeting their goals or using the resources. There are tons of processes, but this is just a kind of an overview of what processes are like, right? Like I said, you have a getting up and going to class process in the morning. So how do you do that? You have a brushing your teeth process, I assume. You have a how do I drive to campus process if you're a commuter. Or how do you walk to your classroom? Finally, supply chain management is the design and execution of relationships and flows. There's the term, relationships and flows, people, right? Product going downstream and people moving around that connect the parties and processes across the supply chain. If you remember our diagram has upstream and downstream. Downstream are customers, upstream are suppliers. Downstream is the product. The product goes downstream as it gets from customer to customer. So what goes upstream? Money. Every time there's a transaction between two companies, product goes downstream toward the customer and money goes upstream because the customer is paying money for that service or that product. And then what goes both ways? Information. So if there are new qualities about a product or service that customers want, that information should go upstream so companies know about that. Additionally, if there's a shortage or a stock out, that information will go downstream. We need to make more. And so all of these things are part of this process that we have, this mindset that we have of these companies and relationships and flows. All right, supply chain partners. Who are the people in the supply chain? 3 of them. Customers who buy our output, we know that. Suppliers who provide the inputs, we know that. The third one's kind of tricky though. The third one is stakeholders who have an interest in organizational well-being and performance. These can be stockholders, they can be bondholders, they could be board members, they could be community partners, they could be people who are interested in a product getting bigger. For example, right now while I'm recording this, the township of Whiteland just approved having a logistics park instead of some green space. I think it's 340 square miles, which is a big deal. So it's getting rid of some things there. The community is upset because the logistics park is going into their area that's normally seen as more rural or suburban. Well, that's a challenge, right? Those are stakeholders. If a company thrives, the stakeholders are going to be affected. And so therefore they have a say or want to have a say in what may happen in that area. So stakeholders could also be interested in community outreach, could be interested in the company like Apple throws a party in Palo Alto, California for the community, right? Or maybe they're giving out things, maybe vaccinations for things, or maybe helping people who are sick, maybe helping the impoverished, and whatever it may be. They are stakeholders who are interested in the success of the company. So it's not just the customers and the suppliers. Could be employees as well, also interested in the success of the company because it affects their job. Finally, I didn't know where to put this, so I put this at the end of the slide deck. There are 3 levels when you're talking about supply chain partnering and planning. The first is strategic, which is a long-term decision. Where do I put a new factory? Where do I put a new business? If I put a new building in, what state should I go to? Amazon did this recently when they were looking to put a second headquarters. Where should I go? And assuming that headquarters would give a lot of jobs to that area. Strategic planning, 3 to 5 years out. Second, tactical planning, intermediate decisions, 3 to 18 months out. So an example would be, what new product do I want to launch? How do I want to change my existing supply base? How do I want to change my existing product base? Who are the customers that I'm focusing on? What's my target market? All of that stuff from marketing, that's tactical planning, 3 to 18 months out. So looking at that. And then finally, operational is day to day. Do I have enough product to make what I need to make today? Do I have enough product to make tomorrow? Do I have quality issues that I need to address right now? Do I have the shipping boxes and the labels that I might need to send it out? Do I have enough people to make product today? Are some people sick? All of those things are day-to-day challenges. That's operational. So tactical is kind of mid-range, 3 to 18 months. Strategic planning is usually more than 18 months, about 3 years, 5-year plans. Operational is day-to-day. And that's all I have. If you have questions, send me an email or talk with me on Zoom or in class. I'm more than willing to help you. Thank you for watching.